Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something we all grapple with, often silently. Annoyance. What makes certain things, certain people just, well, grating.
Yeah,
Just a common thread in our lives, but, we rarely stop to really examine it.
we really don't.
You're here because you like to get informed quickly, thoroughly, so that's exactly what we're going to do.
That's right. Annoyance might seem, I guess, like a minor irritation on the surface.
Yeah, it's just background noise sometimes.
But when you actually look at the science, the psychology behind it, you uncover some really fundamental things about how we work as individuals and, how we interact. It's far more revealing than we often give it credit for.
Precisely. And for this deep dive, we've got a fascinating couple of sources to work with.
Yeah.
We'll be pulling apart insights from annoying, the science of what bugs us, which really gets into the biology and psychology.
Okay.
And also a sharp piece from The Guardian, looking more at the social triggers, the personal stuff that sets us off.
Good combination.
Our mission is simple, really. Understand why we get so irked and what that might tell us about, well, ourselves and the world.
So where do we even begin with something that seems so simple but is clearly quite complex?
Good question.
The book Annoying makes a crucial point right away. Despite being, almost universal, it's actually quite understudied.
Really? That's surprising.
Yeah, some psychologists even view it as just a flavor of anger, maybe a milder form of that core emotion.
Okay, let's unpack that. So for some experts, it's not its own thing.
Not entirely, no.
Does that mean the way we feel annoyed might be different depending on whether it's just annoyance or maybe the start of actual anger?
That's a good way to put it.
And you mentioned something, the valence arousal model. What does that tell us? Where does annoyance sit on the, emotional map?
Right, think of it like plotting emotions on a graph. Valence is good versus bad feeling.
Okay.
And arousal is how sort of energized or calm you feel. According to psychologist MC Flex, annoyance lands in the moderately negative zone. So definitely not pleasant, but it's not, deep despair either.
Right. Just
Yeah.
irritating.
Exactly. And it involves moderate arousal. You're not about to punch a wall, probably.
Probably not.
But you're definitely feeling agitated, stirred up.
Right. That kind of simmering feeling, like a low battery warning for your patience, maybe.
That's a great analogy, but it's not just a random glitch, is it?
No.
The sources suggest annoyance actually serves a purpose. It's trying to tell us something.
Okay, what's it trying to tell us? What's the message?
Well, it can be an early warning system,
Yeah.
a signal that something in our environment or maybe our interactions isn't quite right. It nudges us. Pay attention, Consider if maybe you need to act to get back to feeling comfortable or secure or even just in control, as Flux suggests.
So it's a prompt. Okay. So what are the common culprits then? The things that set off this internal alarm?
Let's dig into the sources of annoyance. The book starts by looking at external factors. Some seem pretty fundamental. Biological, almost.
Like what?
Yes, there are what we might call biological or functional annoyances. A classic example is a baby crying.
Oh, yeah. Impossible to ignore.
Exactly. That sound is inherently designed to grab attention, to cut through everything else and make you respond.
Right. Survival.
And similarly, ambulance sirens, yeah, they're irritating, but they're functionally designed to make sure people get out of the way.
Okay.
Their obnoxiousness serves a clear purpose there.
Those make sense. They're almost hardwired to get a reaction. But then we move into much more nuanced stuff with social allergens, a term from Michael Cunningham.
Yes.
I love that idea, these tiny social particles we get sensitive to. What exactly are these allergens?
Cunningham describes them as those small, often repeated behaviors. They might not cause a huge reaction at first, but they build up over time. They accumulate, and then they lead to this disproportionately strong feeling of irritation.
Like a cumulative effect.
Precisely. He breaks them down. Things like uncouth habits, someone chewing gum super loudly or clipping their nails in public.
The nail clipping. Definitely not a major crime, but it makes you physically recoil, doesn't it?
It really does.
What other daily habits fall into this allergen bucket?
Well, inconsiderate acts, like someone constantly making you wait with no apology.
Oh, that's a big one for me.
Then there are intrusive behaviors. The person who always gives unsolicited advice, whether you want it or not.
The know-it-all.
The book even mentions the classic bar bore, the person who just talks at you.
Right.
And finally, the simple lack of acknowledgement, not saying thank you, not even confirming they got something you sent.
Yeah.
That can really feel like disrespect. It breeds resentment.
Yes, those little social emissions, they definitely add up. Like, a drip torture for the polite soul.
Ah, well put.
Now, both sources mention norm violations. How are these different from those personal social allergens?
Good question. Norm violations, according to Cunningham, are intentional behaviors, but they aren't necessarily aimed at you personally.
Okay.
They go against your broader sense of societal rules, expectations, like someone bragging about evading taxes.
Right, it might not hurt me directly today.
Exactly. But it violates your idea of fairness, of how society should work.
I see.
Then you have norm violations with a more direct impact.
Yeah.
Someone ignoring a no smoking sign right next to you, that affects you more immediately.
So it's about our shared understanding of how things ought to be, even if it's not a personal slight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk repetition. How does that crank up the annoyance factor? Both sources mention how even minor quirks can become, well, incredibly irritating over time, especially with people we're close to. Why is that?
The book brings in equity theory here.
Equity theory.
Basically, we feel most comfortable in relationships when we feel there's a balance. Give and take.
Makes sense.
If that balance feels off, right? If you consistently feel like you're putting in more effort, being more considerate, then those small habits, the ones you maybe tolerated before, they get magnified. It's almost like they become symbols of that bigger imbalance.
Okay, I see that.
And, as those initial romantic feelings in a relationship naturally fade a bit over time,
Yeah,
our tolerance for those little quirks tends to go right out the window with them.
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The slightly endearing way they leave socks on the floor suddenly becomes Exhibit A in the case against them if you feel like you're doing everything else.
Exactly. It transforms.
The book also brings up some really interesting gender dynamics. What we find annoying can differ, apparently.
Yes, research suggests some trends. Men might report being more annoyed by what they see as women being, say, inconsiderate, intrusive, or maybe controlling. Whereas women, on the other hand, tend to report being more annoyed by men's uncouth behaviors.
Like the nail clipping example earlier.
Perhaps. And interestingly, women also seem to be more bothered by violations of those broader societal expectations, littering, ignoring public rules, that sort of thing.
It's like different sets of social contracts feel more salient, maybe.
That could be part of it.
Does the research offer any theories why these differences might exist? Beyond just observing them.
That's a great question. The book touches on how these perceptions might be rooted in traditional gender roles and expectations.
How so?
Well, for example, if men are traditionally, perhaps, expected to be less overtly expressive or directive,
Right.
then a woman offering a lot of unsolicited advice might register more strongly as intrusive or controlling to some men.
I see. And the other way around.
Conversely, if women are often socialized to place a higher value on politeness, consideration, social harmony, then maybe those uncouth behaviors, the breaches of etiquette, just stand out more sharply. They feel more offensive.
That makes sense. It really highlights how our social conditioning shapes what we even notice, let alone react to.
Absolutely. Now, here's a curious point both sources raise. Why do we often seem to have more patience for annoying behavior from complete strangers than from the people we know well? Especially partners or family.
That feels so counterintuitive at first. Why are we more tolerant of the person blasting music on the bus than our roommate doing the exact same thing?
Yeah, it seems odd, doesn't it? The book suggests a couple of key reasons.
Okay.
Firstly, with a stranger, there is an inherent understanding that the interaction is temporary.
Ah, the escape factor.
Exactly. You know you'll get off the bus eventually, you'll escape the noise, but with a partner or roommate, that same behavior. It could be a recurring daily frustration. There's no easy escape.
Right, it feels permanent.
And secondly, we tend to have our, let's say, shields down more with people we're close to.
Meaning,
We're more guarded in public, maybe more braced for minor irritations. So that stuff from strangers might just wash over us. But our loved ones, they have the ability to get under our skin much more easily because we're more open, more vulnerable to them.
the temporary versus permanent annoyance factor, plus the shields down idea that rings very true.
Okay.
Now, the Guardian article shifts the focus a bit, more towards the internal and social roots of annoyance. This idea of being annoyed by traits we actually dislike in ourselves.
Oh, yes.
The author's theater kid example was so relatable. Why do we react so strongly to seeing our own unwanted stuff mirrored back at us?
It's a fascinating psychological quirk, isn't it? Seeing those traits in someone else can stir up discomfort, maybe even shame. because it forces us to confront parts of ourselves we're maybe not thrilled about. It's like they're holding up a mirror and we just don't like the reflection.
Yeah, you want to smash the mirror.
Or it could be a form of psychological projection. We criticize in others what we actually fear or dislike in ourselves. It's a way to, distance ourselves from those qualities.
It's like we're deflecting. Okay. The article also points out that sometimes we're just annoyed by behaviors we flat out don't understand.
Absolutely. When someone's actions don't line up with our understanding of social norms or cultural practices, or even just our own personal logic, it can be frustrating and therefore annoying. This really shows how much our expectations shape our emotional responses.
And this is where cultural differences become huge, right?
Hugely significant, yes.
And the book gives some fantastic examples of how what's normal and therefore not annoying varies so much across cultures. That American big constant smile, for instance.
Exactly. What someone from the U.S. might see as just friendly and open.
Yeah.
Someone from another culture might read as insincere, maybe overwhelming, or even a bit unsettling. Why are they smiling so much?
Right. Different baselines.
Totally. And perspectives on things like plagiarism differ wildly, too.
How so?
In some East Asian cultures, for example, drawing inspiration from or even directly borrowing elements from past work might be seen as a sign of respect for tradition, paying homage.
Okay.
Which can be incredibly frustrating, even baffling for someone operating within a Western framework that heavily emphasizes individual intellectual property.
Wow. Yeah, that could definitely cause friction.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much of what we think is just right or wrong is actually culturally learned.
So much of it. And the anecdote about the American trying to get his tomato seeds planted in a different cultural setting.
Oh, that was funny.
It hilariously illustrates how those different paces of life, different ideas about time and efficiency can be a major source of irritation when they clash.
It perfectly captures that cultural clock speed idea,
Yeah.
how jarring it is when expectations don't align. The book also gets into the desire for control as a trigger for annoyance. It references the movie What About Bob? Why was that character so annoying?
Oh, Bob. He was the ultimate disruption of control, wasn't he?
Totally.
Bill Murray's character just could not shake him. That complete lack of control over his own life, his space, his time being invaded. That was the core of the humor, but also the intense annoyance for Richard Dreyfuss's character.
So the inability to control a situation or another person can really ramp up that feeling of being bugged.
Absolutely. It feels threatening on some level.
What about feelings of inequity? The book talks about how that breeds annoyance, resentment, even wanting to just escape the situation.
Yes, definitely. If we feel we're not being treated fairly, if we see an imbalance in effort or reward.
Like the equity theory again?
Exactly. Or if we feel excluded, unable to participate.
Yeah.
Those feelings can absolutely curdle into annoyance and resentment.
Is there an example of that?
The book mentions that classic monkey experiment where one monkey gets a yummy grape for doing a task.
Okay.
And the other monkey does the same task but gets a boring piece of cucumber.
I've seen that. The cucumber monkey gets furious.
Precisely. It throws the cucumber back. It powerfully shows this fundamental sense of injustice, the frustration it breeds. It's a very basic response to unfairness. Primate level basic.
It's that deep sense of, hey, that's not right. Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Specific personality traits that seem almost designed to annoy, like arrogance.
Arrogance definitely ranks high on the list.
Why is it so grating?
Well, the book highlights this interesting paradox.
Yeah.
People who are arrogant often have such an inflated view of themselves
Right.
that they're genuinely less likely to recognize how irritating their behavior actually is to other people.
So they're clueless.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It really underscores how difficult it is for any of us to accurately judge our own annoyingness. We're all the main character in our own movie, right?
Nah.
So it's hard to see ourselves as the annoying side character in someone else's story.
So self-awareness is key, but also really hard to achieve objectively.
Very much so.
And it's not just the traditionally negative traits that annoy. Apparently, even being too positive can rub people the wrong way. How does that work?
Yeah, that seems counterintuitive too, doesn't it?
A little bit.
But there can be a perception of maybe inauthenticity or a lack of empathy if someone is just relentlessly upbeat, especially when others are clearly struggling.
Like toxic positivity.
It can feel like that, yes.
Yeah.
Like they're not really seeing or acknowledging the reality of the situation, just plastering over it with sunshine.
Right. That can feel dismissive.
No.
The book also briefly mentions social media rules. Even minor violations there can annoy people.
It does, yeah. Which is fascinating because it shows how our online lives are really just a microcosm of our broader culture.
How so?
Things like unilaterally changing plans in a group chat, or not pulling your weight in an online group project, or
Yeah.
constantly humble bragging. These violate unspoken social norms online, just like offline behaviors do.
It's like there's a whole new, often unwritten digital etiquette guide.
Mm-hmm.
And breaking those rules leads to digital irritation.
Exactly. And sometimes it feels like we latch onto these smaller annoyances, online or off, maybe as a way to avoid bigger problems.
What do you mean?
That's a really insightful point from the Guardian article. It suggests that getting disproportionately mad about, say, someone leaving crumbs on the counter might sometimes be a way to distract ourselves from a much larger underlying issue in the relationship or in our lives that feels too overwhelming or difficult to actually tackle head on.
So the crumbs become the scapegoat for deeper dissatisfaction.
Could be a more manageable target for our frustration.
Okay, so we've explored this whole landscape of things that annoy us: external, internal, social, cultural.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do about it? What practical steps can we take? Both for managing our own feelings and maybe dealing with people who get on our nerves.
The Guardian piece offers some really useful strategies here. One key idea is to try and cultivate curiosity about the other person's perspective.
Curiosity, not judgment.
Exactly. Instead of just reacting with, oh, why are they doing that to me?
Yeah.
Try shifting to, I wonder why they're doing that. What might be going on for them?
How does that help?
Often, annoying behavior stems from something else entirely. Maybe insecurity, a different communication style we're not used to. Maybe they're just having a really bad day.
Yeah.
Making that mental shift can be surprisingly effective in just deflating your own annoyance a bit. It creates distance.
That small shift from judgment to curiosity sounds simple, but potentially powerful. What other practical advice is there?
Focusing on managing our own reactions is crucial. Like we said, we can't always control others, but we can work on how we respond.
Taking responsibility for our side of the street?
Pretty much. And engaging in what Flux calls pro-social behaviors.
Pro-social.
Actions that foster connection and goodwill. Offering help, expressing appreciation, finding common ground. These can help build more positive relationships overall, which might naturally reduce annoying behaviors in the first place.
Ah, building bridges.
Remember the theater kid example? Working together on a shared goal helped the author overlook individual annoyances. Connection trumped irritation.
That's a great takeaway. Focus on connection, not just the irritation. Now, the book gets into some really fascinating cultural approaches. It mentions the Ifaluk and the Utgui Kalingamiwut. How do they deal with annoyance?
These cultures offer such a different lens because they strongly discourage showing negative emotions outwardly.
Really? How does that work?
The Ifaluk, for instance, have this incredibly nuanced vocabulary just for different types of annoyance.
Like what?
Like tipmakmach, that's the specific annoyance you feel when you're unwell. Or tang, the frustration of dealing with personal bad luck you just can't change.
Wow, specific words for specific flavors of being bugged.
Exactly. They even have song, which is described as a kind of justifiable anger. It's acknowledged, but then the culture encourages you to intentionally release it, not act on it disruptively.
It's like having a shared language and a framework to process it internally without needing conflict.
Right. And the Utkuhikalimiut Inuit seem to take it even further. Even a hint of expressed annoyance or anger could lead to social ostracism, basically silence and rejection.
That sounds intense. What can we learn from these cultural examples, even if they seem extreme to us?
Well, they really highlight that our emotional responses aren't set in stone. They're heavily shaped by our cultural context.
So annoyance isn't universal in its expression.
The feeling might be, but how we deal with it isn't. It suggests there are alternative ways to process and handle annoyance that don't necessarily involve outward venting or confrontation.
Like?
Perhaps cultivating greater internal awareness, maybe acceptance of these feelings without needing to act on them immediately, like the Ifaluk seem to do. That could be valuable.
Interesting. The book also touches on intentional annoyance times when we try to annoy others. Maybe subconsciously, maybe not. Especially partners.
Yes. Why do you think we sometimes do that? Pushing buttons.
It seems almost like a twisted way to get attention. Or maybe a passive-aggressive way to express frustration without having a direct, scary conversation.
Could be both.
That passive-aggressive door slam definitely communicates something, doesn't it?
Oh, it speaks volumes.
Yeah.
And finally, this rather sobering thought. We are often really, really bad judges of how annoying we are to other people.
Yeah. Why is that gap so common? Why the blind spot?
It comes back to that idea of being inside our own heads. We're focused on our own intentions, our own perspective.
I didn't mean it that way.
Exactly. We often lack the objectivity to see how our actions actually land on others. We might think we're being helpful, but it comes across as intrusive or condescending.
So our perception isn't reality for others.
Not necessarily. That's why feedback from others, even if it's uncomfortable to hear sometimes,
It's definitely uncomfortable.
is actually far more valuable for understanding our own annoying quotient than our self-assessment usually is.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. Bring all these threads together.
Right.
What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into annoyance?
I think the biggest thing is that annoyance is surprisingly complex, right? It has biological roots, sure, but also huge social and cultural dimensions.
It's not just trivial.
Not at all. It acts as a signal something's off. Could be a sound, a social slip-up, a feeling of unfairness.
And what annoys us says a lot about us.
Definitely. It reveals a lot about our personal values, our expectations, conscious or not, and maybe even those bits of ourselves we're not keen on acknowledging.
A mirror effect.
Right, and cultural differences are massive in shaping what even counts as annoying. Learning to manage it often means shifting perspective, managing our own reactions, and maybe even looking at how other cultures handle it differently.
And for you, the listener, hopefully this is giving you that quick yet thorough understanding you were looking for. A richer view on this everyday feeling without it feeling like too much hard work.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. As you go about your day, perhaps pay a little more attention to the things that consistently get under your skin.
What are your personal triggers?
Yeah. What might those specific annoyances be signaling about your values, your expectations, maybe even those unacknowledged parts of yourself we talked about?
And the flip side.
And maybe, just maybe, it's worth a moment's thought. Are there any of those social allergens you might be, perhaps unknowingly, sprinkling around for others? Food for thought.